My name is Emma Brown, and I'm the founder of Whimble. We are a care tech platform based in Ottawa, Canada. And our goal is to make personal care more accessible. So, connecting people who need short term or urgent care with experienced vetted attendants on demand. You can think of us like an Uber for PSWs. We also partner with event organizers like music festivals and major sporting events. Still waiting on Maple Leaf Sports and Entertainment to give us a call for the World Series. So if anyone here knows MLSE, feel free to hook us up for the World Series games coming up in Toronto. But our goal at these events is to ensure that any on-site accessibility accommodations include on-site attendant services to help make those public spaces and events truly inclusive for people who rely on care. So today we're diving into a pretty interesting topic, super critical and often overlooked. And in my experience as a non-disabled person speaking with people who don't have lived experience, this is a really misinterpreted and misunderstood issue. So we're going to talk about the real cost of living for people with disabilities. I've encountered so many non-disabled people who are surprised to hear that the cost of living isn't equal and there are major challenges. And so we're going to chat with our guest today about the unique realities that impact financial stability, independence, and opportunity for people with disabilities. So I'm so honored to welcome our guest today, Gift Tshuma. Gift is a Toronto-based disability rights activist and music composer with a degree in sociology, minor in law and society from Concordia. And for over 15 years, he has served as an accessibility consultant for the Government of Canada, educational institutions, rehabilitation centers, nonprofit organizations. I think you've done some feedback for us. So for-profit organizations. And he was recognized with CBC Quebec's 2022 Black Changemaker Award. Gift continues to champion accessibility and inclusion through his work with March of Dimes Canada and Blurring the Boundaries. There's about a million other things I could have added. I've condensed it down a little bit, but thank you so much for joining us today, Gift. I'm really excited for you to help guide this conversation with me so that we can make sure people are more aware of the realities of the cost of living. Thanks so much.
Thank you for having me.
Awesome. So let's get started by, I think it'd be helpful for everyone on the call to have a common understanding of the realities of day-to-day living costs. So setting like a common definition or common like baseline understanding of what we're going to talk about today. So just to get us like an easy question to get us started, I was wondering if you could chat a little bit about some of the hidden expenses that people with disabilities face that aren't always captured in standard cost of living discussions.
Yeah, absolutely. So first, I would like to set the foundation as to when we talk about cost of living, most of the time we are highlighting the inflation that's happening within the economy. We're talking about groceries. And what I find is missing is the actual lived reality for people with disabilities. Cost of living isn't equal. And these disability related expenses could range from paying a portion for your care services. It could range from getting physiotherapy or any other forms of therapy that you need. Housing modifications, because houses are not built with accessibility in mind. Vehicle modifications, because vehicles they come out of the assembly line and they're not necessarily built with accessibility in mind, and all of those require significant financial contributions. And yes, I feel we're fortunate to be living in a country where there are grants, there are funding and resources available to cover those costs, but the eligibility criterias for those kind of programs, and they carry a lot of red tape, if I should say, a lot of barriers, a lot of obstacles, one of which is the barrier to entry to those grants is financial restrictions, right? They'll say that you need to have a household income of X amount. Most of the time, it's about $60,000 for a household income. And if you're someone that's not living alone and you have a partner or whoever, that household income would double. And that leaves you out of like the equation of being accepted to benefit from those programs. And then if you think of maybe deciding not to have employment and live on government support, financial resources, then you're unable to purchase a house. You're unable to buy a vehicle because that's just life. And you're even talking about wheelchair repairs. Those are very expensive too. So those are like some of the realities that folks with disabilities experience on a regular. And if we look at stats, like those expenses can accumulate up to $15,000 a year in addition to your standard of living costs, which actually leaves people with disabilities close to the poverty line, even if they have a good job.
And I'm actually surprised at how low that 15,000 is based on my own experience of having a family member with a disability, and I know his medical
Mhm,
supplies are thousands of dollars a month. I've
mhm.
seen his vehicle repair costs, like, it adds up a lot. Do you mind just sharing some actual numbers? For example, I'll throw out some theoreticals. If you were to build a new ramp for a home, like,
Yeah.
what is a cost that you are looking at for that type of expense? Like, just to
So,
get in your home.
a- absolutely. It's funny that you mentioned that because I'm actually in the middle of that with my partner. And we had budgeted a conservative amount for building a ramp. We thought that it's going to cost us maybe $4,000 or $5,000 with materials and contractor fees. And in our case, it ended up being a $10,000 ramp. And I'm not talking about a motorized ramp. I am
Mhm,
talking like wood, lumber, material, standard ramp. It's not fancy. And
mhm,
yeah, and as a result, we've had to create a GoFund page to help alleviate some of those costs, sadly. And
mhm,
yeah, that's just a little insight
mhm.
into some of those costs.
Yeah, just a reality. The other thing that I find non-disabled people are always really surprised about is the cost of wheelchairs and wheelchair repairs. So, for example, a power wheelchair that have electronic components, can you
Mhm.
share roughly how much that piece of the equipment costs
See,
for that?
absolutely. I just want to give a little background to when it comes to government contributions to medical devices like a power wheelchair or a manual
Mhm,
wheelchair, whatever that device may be. The funding is provincially based. So each province will have its own criterias and its own budget as to how much they're able to put in towards an individual's wheelchair. In my case at the time, my latest chair, I got it while I was still living in Quebec, in Montreal. And the great thing with Quebec is many of the financial resources, they do not have any income requirements. So they're able to service your wheelchair free of charge,
mhm,
etc. So my wheelchair, since it's fully customized to my needs, is $18,000. So that's going from like seating position customized to my body, and the control system that I use is ultra sensitive. It's a joystick that requires very little force to
mhm.
control, and that's a $2,000 joystick. Now living in Ontario, I've had to shoulder those expenses whenever I need my joystick to be repaired. And yeah, the $15,000 a year, it exceeds that when you put everything into pen and paper. And
In Ontario, I guess it depends on the income threshold and other factors, but do you have any
yeah,
does your joystick repair get subsidized at all in Ontario, for example?
no, the repair is not at all because I work full time. If I was not working full time, it would be covered completely. And as long as I'm between the ages of 18 and 64.
It's like the mental gymnastics required to figure out where you fit and when it's worth it to work and when it like, what income threshold you have to
Yes.
be at to make
Yeah.
worthwhile, like, it's
Yep.
absolutely wild.
Yep.
Yeah,
And to buy a new chair in Ontario, they'll cover 75% of the cost, and you
wow,
need to cover 25% of the cost towards a new chair.
that's
So most people, what they'll do, they'll reach out to nonprofits, organizations for assistance to
mhm.
help supplement.
When you or other people are weighing that, like, employment versus relying on government supports, like, moral decision and how you wanna live your life, can you talk us through, like, the barriers that changes your ability to access these types of funding programs when you do have full-time employment. Just talk us through what it's like to struggle through that, like weighing of trade-offs of looking for full-time employment versus relying on the existing subsidies.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And before I say anything, I just want to also be cognizant that people have different energy levels in terms of what they're able to do and not do and the decisions that they make. So in my case, when I decided to pursue full-time employment, is I had dreams. I had dreams to travel. I had dreams to get married one day and own a home. And to achieve those dreams, it's just not going to be possible living on social assistance and disability benefits alone. And even if I worked, it's just going to be very difficult. So I made a decision early on while I was getting into the workforce that I'm going to have to work more than one job. Like for the last few years, I have three jobs and that's for me to not just live, that's for me to thrive. And that's incredibly exhausting to do that. But that's a choice that I consciously made in order to live the life that I want. And it's something that I made because I know my capacity, I know my energy capacity, I know what I am able to do before putting myself in a precarious situation.
I assume maybe whether you've learned it the hard way or not, you like know your threshold for burnout and what your body can tolerate. Because there are lots of people who
Yeah,
don't have my energy threshold, my burnout threshold is too low to manage multiple jobs. So everyone has to kind of
absolutely.
know where
Uh,
they are at.
Absolutely. It's really important. And for me, if I can give a little bit of a secret sauce here, is that I have a 9 to 5 job, Monday to Friday. And my other jobs, they are not tied to specific hours of the
Mhm.
day. They're essentially just based on deadlines. So I can work at my own pace, certain times of the days where it's more easier for me to work. And that's what I've chosen to do is when I'm taking on contracts, they're not time based, they
Mhm.
are deadline based.
Speaking of, you've envisioned the life you want to live, and that involves having a spouse, getting married. Can you talk a little bit? Because I think people are also always really surprised to hear how marriage, cohabitation, like how that seemingly simple act of having a partner really affects financial or really complicates financial situations. So, could you maybe just start us off by telling us a bit about how cohabitation or marriage affects someone's ability to access benefits and funding?
When I think about that, it makes me really sad because
Mhm,
you are put in a position where you're having to choose whether you want to fall in love and cohabitate with someone or get married with someone or not. And that is a choice that we humans, if I'm to remove disability out of the equation, the choice that we humans shouldn't have to make. And the sad reality is the government does not see disabled people as people who can actually live in loving relationships, in cohabitator related relationships, right? We are expected to be institutionalized. We are expected not to be contributing members of society, especially when it comes to work, right? And all of these things are boxing us in, they're isolating us, and they further cement the fact that we do not matter. And that's really unfortunate. And I think those are some of the systemic and policy issues that need to change drastically. This conversation is more than just income thresholds. It's about dignity. It's about autonomy and the right to build a life without bureaucratic punishment. And these barriers that are put in front of us, they stem from ableist policy design. It's like systems that are built for disabled people rather than with us. And I think we need benefits and policies that reflect interdependence, not dependency, that reflect community and not control. So that's what I would say about that.
Mhm. Yeah, I met someone a few months ago. Her and her partner maintain separate residences
Mhm,
because, say, they're paying $1,500 for a studio apartment. To have a
mhm,
second address is cheaper because it allows them to maintain their benefits at $1,500 a month of extra unnecessary rent per month is still cheaper and more financially sustainable than
yeah,
cohabitating on a single rent and losing access to benefits. So it's like we're not talking small numbers here. It's
no,
absolutely wild.
it's
Um,
true.
yeah. If you say we had someone who's in charge of policies and benefits on this call or tuning in afterwards to the recording, what would be the number one thing that's like the root cause of this issue around discrimination against like cohabitation?
Income thresholds altogether, I think that would go a long way. And also, they shouldn't view partners or spouses as the only caregivers for the person, right? Like they have a life
Mhm,
too. They're my partner. They're not supposed to be my caregiver, right? Like they're my spouse. There shouldn't be an expectation for them to be also my caregiver,
mhm,
right? And I think like they need to understand that like people with disabilities want to live a normal life
mhm.
just like anybody else. And yeah, so punishing us, it does not help with that. It should become a human right, if I'm to be honest.
You can just sort that out on top of your 3 other jobs, that'd be great. In all your in
Absolutely.
all your spare time. So,
Absolutely.
it's wild though, and unless they've lived through it or have a close friend or family member who's lived through it, I don't think they realize how, like, truly discriminatory and punishing the policies are. Okay, so y one thing that you mentioned earlier that I love was, like, more about community rather than control and really designing policies with people and not imposing upon
Mhm.
them. In some of your advocacy work and policy work, like what does an authentic partnership, but like an authentic way of engaging folks with disabilities in that policy making process? Have you seen examples where it's really worked?
I've seen it work in not in the financial structure policies, but more in design standards policies, where I've seen, so there's Accessibility Standards Canada, where they consulted people with disabilities across the country on what those standards should look like, what is important, what should be included in them. And to me, that was done very well because they were consulting members of the community, and members of the community were able to fully articulate what is important when it comes to designing spaces for us, what should be included in there. That's a good starting point, it's a good blueprint. And I'm not saying that the consultation process was perfect. I think if we were to use that as a blueprint and as a stepping stone into building something better when it comes to consulting with new policies, I think that would go a long way.
Mhm. And do you know, I don't know if you participated personally, but do you know if there was compensation offered to the people who consulted on on those standards? Or typically
Yeah, most of the time, sometimes there is consultation, sometimes there's not, but there's more conversations now within, like, whenever there's government consultations where that people with disabilities need to be paid for
Mhm,
the expertise that they're providing. Pay equity is something that really rests strongly within me. It's really important to pay people for what they bring to the table, because what they're bringing to the table is something that is not taught. It's
mhm,
something that is lived.
mhm. Yeah, and I would imagine it's just so draining sometimes to constantly have to be convincing people or explaining stuff that, like, you shouldn't have to explain over and over again.
And I'd say what's also very frustrating for most of us is that whenever we're consulted, we are sometimes told that there's no budget to pay us for our expertise. And that's a slap in the face because
Mhm,
there's no other consultant that they would approach would
mhm.
do work for free. And I think it's just the perception of what they think about people with disabilities that needs to shift.
I saw a LinkedIn post on this topic that you published recently, and I think I made this comment, but my brother was contacted. There's a major infrastructure project happening in or under discussion right now in Ottawa, which is redesigning our football stadium and a huge public space. And
Mhm.
I think I saw a budget of 350 million for this project to
Wow.
develop condos and rebuild the hockey arena under the stadium. Anyway, huge
Mhm.
project, huge budget. And he was contacted to consult on the accessibility planning process and offered gift cards to the restaurants next to the stadium. And it's
Wow.
I just when I he sent me a screenshot of this invitation and I just wanted to scream because it was
Wow.
how dare you, yeah, not value recognize that this is a needed service and then not value it and offer
Yeah.
gift cards when there's clearly a need for cold hard cash to cover these cost of living realities.
Yeah. So you actually just sparked a thought here, if I could just say quickly. There are companies now and organizations that are offering gift cards as like part of compensation. And much of the thought behind it that I've heard is that those who are receiving governmental financial support, they don't want to have to declare the amount or having to get penalized financially for that. And I get that idea. I get the concept, but I think people who are being consulted should be given the
Yeah.
choice to decide what form of payment they want based on their current lifestyle. And not giving us that choice is
Mhm.
actually infantilizing because these institutions are telling us what is best for us and what isn't best for us.
Yeah. Choice is like every time I talk to someone or we consult on something or we're working on a project, choice is always like the root thing that it boils down to. You know your situation best, you know your needs, your financial situation, like, or when we're talking about like accessible events or whatever, like the choice is just seemingly
Mhm.
simple solution to so many of these. Yeah, it's
Yep.
very
Yep.
frustrating. There's obviously a little bit of work to do here. So I was wondering when we going back to talking about community and talking about advocacy, I haven't paid as much attention as I should be right now to the Canada Disability Benefit, for example, but I have seen a lot of other organizations in this space like writing letters and putting out like their take on how that's developing. And I'm just wondering like when it comes to that kind of advocacy work and grassroots building, like what do you think that has an impact when governments are really slow to change policies?
Absolutely. There's power in numbers of voices, right? Like we need to speak to the government from like grassroots level, yes, and also use the organizations that are our allies to speak to that because like they carry a certain level of status when talking with the government. And I think that goes a long way for sure. And I think we as disability rights advocates should partner with as many organizations as possible in order to affect the change that we want to see for the Canada Disability Benefit. Because $200 a month is something that's absolutely ridiculous and it's not enough to
Mhm,
make ends meet. Someone needs to pay for medication, someone needs to
mhm,
decide whether they pay bills or buy groceries,
yeah,
right? Those are like decisions that people shouldn't have to make in order to survive. We
mhm,
definitely knock at the doors and figure out ways for collaborating and allying with organizations that are really well known within the provincial government space too, and go from there. And
mhm,
also reaching out to your local MPs. I think people take for granted like how much influence MPs may have. as individuals, I think it's really important to write to our MPs and address these issues, ask for them to include them in the lobby when they're talking with politicians from a federal level.
And even I know here in Ottawa at the city council level, like we do have a city councilor who's I'm not sure if she's the chair, what her official role is, but there is a city councilor who's dedicated to the city accessibility council, I think, which is
Mhm.
a bunch of different people with different lived experiences, different types of disabilities, providing consultation to the city. I'm not sure if they're compensated. I would like to look into that now that I'm thinking about it. Even at the city level, there are people who need to know that people care about these issues for sure. The last question, I do want to leave a lot of time for audience questions, but I just wanted to circle back to like my initial intro view with the music component as a composer and having this whole other life in the like creative space. How do those intersect for you, or do you like to have like compartmentalized interests, or is there any role for like music and the arts to help influence this side? Or yeah, I'm just curious like what your take is on those two like very different sides of brain maybe.
Oh, yeah. So in my art practice, I do advocacy there as well. Advocacy around building music technology that is accessible and inclusive for people with disabilities. That's primarily my focus in that space. How do we create art events that are accessible? How do we create music technology and music software that takes into account the various needs? That's usually like the lens that I take. I try to figure out how to infuse advocacy in different environments. I used to perform for quite a few years before transitioning into the advocacy part of the arts. And with that, I was advocating for accessible venues
Mhm.
because I'd be invited to perform in some spaces, and the venue may be accessible, but the stage is not accessible. So that's what sparked the idea of broadening my scope of advocacy within the arts beyond the physical space to also include other aspects of it.
Yeah, the backstage, the green rooms, like all
Yeah.
of these areas that artists
The
want to.
recording studio software,
Yeah,
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 everything, yeah.
yeah. Very cool. If you ever perform again, please let me know. I would love to experience that. We did get a few questions submitted in advance, so I can jump into those. We did have one
Mhm.
question, and this was right at the beginning, so we might have answered your question by talking about Canada and the provincial regulations. But just to clarify, both Gift and I are based in Canada. So it looks like we do have someone from the UK. I feel like most things are fairly similar between Canada and the UK policy-wise, but I would love to hear in the chat if you've recognized, just from what Gifts shared over the past few minutes, if you've recognized any major differences. I'd just be really curious to hear about that. One question we did chat about earlier, and it was someone did ask if you could reform one government policy today to improve affordability and inclusion, what would it be? And I know you mentioned already removing income thresholds. Is there a
Mhm.
specific policy that would apply to that you have in mind, or just across the board get rid of income?
I would say across the board,
Hmm.
and also pay equity for disability related funding, because the way disability funding works is it's taking into account general standard of living for each province. It's not taking into account other living expenses associated with disability. So I think there should be a more holistic approach when they're calculating how much each person should receive in a given province, and looking to incorporating disability expenses as well, so that people are not just struggling to survive
Hmm.
their living.
Yeah. There's two other questions that I'm really also curious about. So, say you're a person with a disability, you've made a choice that for your life and your goals and what you envision for yourself, you do want to work full time, which means giving up access to a lot of those benefits. And then you find a job, and then your employer's hopefully working well with you to set up the required accommodations. But looking at like overall compensation, are there any like inclusive compensation practices that employers can implement for people with disabilities to recognize that those cost of living realities?
That's a very good question. I like that. I haven't come across any employer that does this effectively because when we look at salaries for folks, it's based on geographical location and what's a reasonable wage for someone
Job
to live.
title.
Yeah, job title, etc. But I think in addition to that, they should include access related needs and increase it accordingly to that. Because if we were to take, let's say, just gonna pull a random number, let's say we were to take $60,000 a year for a mid-level managerial position. That's enough for someone who doesn't have any disability. That's enough for them to live, thrive, and enjoy the pleasures of life. But if we were to take that 60,000 and we apply it to someone with a disability, and we also gotta keep in mind that there are people who have like more than one disabilities. They have like maybe four disabilities, and all of those, or each of those, they come with their own financial needs. That 60,000 won't go far. Or even that 80,000 might not go far because of all these other factors. So I think as part of HR or PNC, people and culture services, is when when the employee is negotiating salary, is that like we're taking into account also access needs. That's part of accommodation. Accommodation shouldn't only be limited to your functionality in the workspace, your output level. It should also be included when it comes to pay equity. That's what we're trying to do. It's not like we're saying equality, we're saying pay equity.
And
And
what
of
does
course,
your
that may ruffle some feathers.
but no, it's an interesting conversation around what does the take home pay of a non-disabled person after typical taxes and stuff, like how does that compare to the take home pay of a disabled person? And if you're taking off that 15,000 or whatever it is, like your equity pillars are drastically different.
Yeah.
And then the last question, and I'll just give everybody 60 more seconds if they have anything else they want to ask. But the last question that came in was there's still, and I hear it a lot because I think maybe people feel more comfortable expressing these opinions to a non-disabled person, but there is still a lot of really unpleasant stigma around disability benefits. Like when I'm talking with people about Whimble, and the reality of where Whimble's at right now is people still have to pay privately out of pocket for our services. I don't want it to be that way. And I'm actively trying to figure out how to incorporate our services into different government funding programs. But the reality is we have to start somewhere, and it is a private service. When I tell people about Whimble, they say, oh, that's great because everybody just gets care for free and all their medical supplies for free and prescription. Like as soon as you're disabled, everything's free. I'm always just no. So I'm curious, in your opinion, how we reframe that public stigma. How do we bring people into these types of conversations to reframe that narrative that it's nothing's free?
I'd
big,
say
big question.
it's a very big question. I'd say the bare minimum is free. Anything above bare minimum is not free. If I'm to look at my care, for example, I'm given X amount of hours per week. That's far from what I actually need. It's not taking into account if I need to go out at a party or go out at a concert or,
Go to a
you
Blue Jays
know,
World Series.
in a date with my wife and not have to worry about us like tossing the coin, which bathroom am I going to use, like the female bathroom or the male bathroom, because sometimes they don't have gender neutral washrooms, right? And that's a living, that's life. The reality is the government is only giving us the bare minimum for free. So that's what I'd use as an educational piece for people in order to understand what these realities actually look like for us.
And I think like surviving, if I can add to that, barely surviving on that bare minimum requires a lot of concessions around or compromises or accepting maybe less than you wanted for your life. And there's a big jump you have to go to income wise to be able
Yeah.
to have like acceptable levels of supports and not lose that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
also, it's like the bare minimum in the surviving piece is like very much tied to the human rights approach where they need to adhere to, where the government needs to adhere to. And as
Mhm.
long as they're meeting that benchmark, they think all is fine and well in the world.
Yeah. And I know we're out of time, but I always want to rant
Hmm.
about this because I've talked to people who work for the provincial government in home
Hmm.
care, and they think supportive housing is like the gold standard of like they want everyone in supportive housing, but like you've taken away choice over where you want to live. You've taken away choice over like
Independence.
the type of residence you want to live in, and your care in a supportive housing unit ends when you leave those four walls. Like as soon as you
Yeah.
leave your building, you're on your own. So it's not
Yeah.
solving. Yeah, I just get very frustrated when that's treated
Yeah.
as like the gold standard. And
Yeah. And in those settings too, you're told what time you should wake up. You're told what time you should go to bed, what time you should eat, right?
who can live with you, if you can have pets, if you can
Yeah,
just so there's so many things that you lose freedom wise to get that level of care. And that level of care is still not even that great.
no, it's not.
Yeah. Anyway, that's always my little rant.
And that level
um,
of care,
mhm,
just for me to highlight the uniqueness of that level of care, is not client-led. It's very much already pre-planned by them, and it's
mhm,
not flexible.
yeah.
And what Wimble really strives best at is the fact that like the services that you guys are providing is really much client-led care. If
Mhm.
I want to wake up one morning and say, I just want to eat a cold pizza for breakfast, nobody's going to question me why I'm eating pizza for breakfast.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
if I'm in a setting where it's not client-led care, the person will say, that's not healthy.
Mhm.
Why are you
Yeah,
eating pizza
yeah.
for
And
breakfast?
we hear that all the time. Someone else gave the example of if I wanna put ketchup on my cereal, I can put ketchup on my cereal. It's like,
Yeah,
you do you. That's disgusting, but you do you.
there you go. There you
Yeah, yeah.
go.
And the from my understanding, supportive housing care is very much built around like a doctor prescribed care plan. And like
Yeah.
with Whimble, yes, we want to know like your needs and make sure we're finding you an appropriate match in terms of the skills and
Mhm.
experiences of the care provider. But we frankly don't really give a shit what the doctor said.
Yeah,
If you decide you want to do something that day or whatever, that's you. And we just try to find somebody who has the appropriate skill level and experience to help you do that. Thank you so much, Gift. I really appreciate you having
thank
this
you.
conversation with us today. Thank you to everybody who joined us. We'll share a reporting and feedback form with everybody. We'd love to hear what you thought about today's conversation. If there's other topics we want to bring Gift back for to talk about, maybe we'll do a music performance. And yeah, feel free to reach out to either of us if you have questions about Gift's work or about Whimble.
Take care.
Take care. Bye, Gift.